Thank you, David, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to speak even before the two Knesset members. So I appreciate the occasion and thank you very much for organizing it. There's nothing new in the international activity around this issue. Immediately after the Six-Day War, the four powers in the Security Council, I think with the exception of China at that time, met in order to push for some sort of a diplomatic activity. We had the emissary of the UN, Gunnar Yaring, running around, and the only times where the international activity subsided, it was when we and our neighbors, either the Egyptians or the Palestinians and the Jordanians, got together and worked towards agreement between ourselves. And when there is no such direct bilateral diplomatic activity, we can see the rise of the international involvement in our regional conflicts. Now, the recent wave of internationalization began basically when the world or the international community discovered there's nothing to happen between us and the Palestinians. The EU was the initiator or the first to launch some sort of an activity. The foreign ministers of the then 28 members gathered together in the summer of 2014 and gave the perimeters of what they think should be the solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The French translated this immediately, and a year after came with a draft resolution. They submitted a draft resolution to the Security Council. I ask for your indulgence. Let me read the parameters, the major guidelines that they saw as essential for the solution. First of all, they said the solution has to be reached within 18 months. So there is a very tight timetable in this respect. Then they said, and I read from the draft, borders based on the 4th of June 1967 lines with mutually agreed limited equivalent land swaps. Security arrangements that respect the sovereignty of the non-militarized state of Palestine, including through a full and phased withdrawal of Israeli defense forces. An agreed, just, fair, and realistic solution to the refugee question. The status of Jerusalem that fulfills the aspiration of both parties for Jerusalem as the future capital of the two states and safeguards its status for people around the world. An agreed settlement of other outstanding issues, including water between the parties. Then came, in order to forestall this initiative, I repeat, the draft was already presented to the Security Council. The only thing which stopped this from being voted was a combination of opposition, certainly from Israel, then the Palestinians themselves, and the US, which loaned the 9 months Secretary Kerry activity, which came to an end last year with no greater success. And then you saw a new spate of initiatives. French, a different approach, which is still going on, and that is the meeting of the foreign minister that David referred to, and they decided that before the end of the year there will be the big league conference. There is a similar, less publicized Russian initiative in the same vein. There is an Egyptian initiative. I'm not so sure that I understand the initiative, but there is one which President Sisi came out with and tried to push it with some Israeli leaders, Palestinian leaders, etc. I don't think that anything is coming out of that. And there is the Palestinian initiative, and that is basically going to the international fora, whether the UN or any other forum that will accept them and agree to cooperate with them. Now, traditionally, Israel objected to the idea of the internationalization, basically saying the only way to achieve peace between us and our neighbors generally, and certainly the Palestinians, is going through the bilateral direct negotiations. And that was based, ever since 1967, on the notion that the international community, by and large, is not, I would say it in the minimal way I can present it, is not balanced and it's not supportive of the Israeli cause. The question is whether this is still valid. I think that time is running out. If tomorrow morning the Palestinians will get up and say, you know what, Israelis, you convinced us. The fence, the security fence, is the border. And we are willing to accept it. You Israelis will compensate us. The fence takes about 8.5% of the West Bank. So you will compensate us with territory elsewhere. That will leave about 80 to 100,000 settlers behind the defense line. And I cannot see an Israeli government, regardless of its political color, taking out these numbers of settlers. We are still facing the people, the problems of the people who were coming out of the Gaza Strip, and they were only 7,000. I'm talking about 80,000. Now, I think that because of time running out, and because I don't see any possibility that the two sides, Israelis and Palestinians, will plunge into direct negotiations, and I don't apportion blame to this side or the other side. It's time that the international community is creating or will be creating some sort of guidelines for the future solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, this is a very delicate question. Who will do it? What will be the substance? I read you on purpose the draft that was submitted by the French. I think that Israel cannot accept this, but it can try and improve that. So David alluded, or indirectly, or he gave you a hint that somebody not far from here is contemplating a possibility of doing it. That's to be after the elections, beginning of November. I don't know that this will take place. But the question then for the Israeli government, assuming that this is the situation, will it enter into some sort of a dialogue with the administration over the wording of the key elements in such a resolution? Not every word or every sentence in what I read to you is necessarily bad. You look at the refugee, for example, formula. This is something with which we can live with. You look at the Jerusalem solution, I can improve that. The territorial one, I will certainly want to improve it. For example, it says equivalent land swaps. Now, how, for example, you reconcile it with the fact that before 1967, the Palestinians did not have a direct connection between Gaza and the West Bank. And how do you measure this new addition to the Palestinian entity? Is it 1 for 1? I'm not so sure that I would settle for 1 for 1. And I think that this addition is calling for not so equivalent land swaps in this particular case. The situation in the Middle East generally, I think that it improves the Israeli case when it comes to security, for example. Not necessarily in the issue of land for security, but, for example, control over the airspace. But there is a program called the electromagnetic space, which is also something which Israel is very sensitive to. The bottom line, and I will stop here, is what I say that the traditional opposition by Israel to international involvement in guidelines for the solution is something that we ought to think about it in terms of pushing forward the solution, B, in a way which does not harm or even improve the chances of Israel when and if the negotiations start or restart. Now, the importance of such a draft resolution and a resolution in the Security Council is that it saves a lot of the haggling and fighting over how to proceed, what is the agenda. This will be the new benchmark from where the negotiation restart. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I should have added that also that Oded is a senior fellow at what's called INSS. It's known to many of you, Israel's Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, where he writes, he's a prolific writer. So anyway, thank you very much. And Michael is going to be our next speaker.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Robert, wherever you are. Thank you again, Washington Institute. Always great to be back here to see the same Washington food, not actually to eat it, but to see it. It's always very nice to be with my colleague Merav Michaeli, who enables me not to be a prisoner of Zion and to get out of Knesset once in a while because we have to pair off with one another. Oded, Odin. Can you misspell my name as Michael Oded and I can be a Norse god too? That'd be very nice. Thank you. I came into my job as ambassador as a historian, so I'll tell you that the internationalization of the Zionist, Palestinian, Zionist, Arab, however we want to call it, Palestine issue, began in the 1920s. And we've had dozens and dozens of international efforts in this conflict, some of them with the blessing of the Zionist movement, some of them against the blessing of the Zionist movement. Those of you who remember the Lausanne Conference of 1951. Who remember? Dennis, you remember the Lausanne Conference? Boy, we're aging ourselves. they go back. The big difference today between international efforts like, say, the Madrid conference and what is occurring now, perhaps with the French, with the Quartet, with the possibility of an Obama formula, is the nexus between international efforts that are not with the blessing of the State of Israel and the Palestinian effort to internationalize and legalize the conflict. And the goal of that is to delegitimize the State of Israel. And there's a debate whether the goal of that is a better two-state solution or a one-state solution that doesn't include the State of Israel. I'm leaning toward the latter half. I don't think this is designed, I don't think BDS, I don't think delegitimization is designed to get a better two-state solution. I think it's designed to take us down. And that means that these efforts then move into the category of what once could be seen at worst a nuisance to something close to a strategic threat to the State of Israel. And then begs the question. I'm extremely skeptical, Oded, about Israel's ability to influence the content of the French initiative. I am more than skeptical of Israel's ability to influence any possible Obama initiative. I think we pretty much know what those parameters look like, and they don't lend themselves to much flexibility. I wear another hat. I am the subcommittee chairman of Foreign Affairs in the Knesset. It's a closed committee, so I won't go into details, but we've held hearings on these initiatives, and the general feeling of the Israeli professionals who follow this is that we're an earthquake, a tsunami, and a volcano. And I don't mean this in any wishful way. If we were to strike France, nothing is going to alter their intent to pursue their initiative and the content of their initiative from our perspective. There's very little we can do. What then can we do? And then we go back to the 1920s, if you will. To my mind, the essence of Zionism was initiative, was taking our destiny into our own hands, assuming responsibility for our own fate. And what has also characterized the last, say, 6-7 years of this nexus between international efforts and the Palestinian goal of delegitimizing Israel is complete passivity on the Israeli part. We have undertaken no initiatives. I know we're going to agree a lot on this. We may agree on disagree on the details, but the essence of it is that we have been a punching bag. And we have the ability. Now, we had a conference here, a wonderful conference here on the U.S.-Israel strategic relationship over the last couple of days. And one of the points I tried to make in the conference was that there exists in Knesset and Israeli politics today a center. It may be a little center-right, a center-left. And I've watched this center coalesce over the year and a half that I've been in Knesset. And what does the center basically say? We subscribe to the two-state formula. Do we think it's going to happen tomorrow? We don't. Do we think that the seat opposite us is necessarily filled? We don't. Might it be tomorrow? Who knows? But it is not tenable for Israel to remain passive in face of these international initiatives, which, linked with the Palestinian effort to delegitimize us, are going to pose a strategic threat. And therefore, what can we do? What we can do, what the maximum any Israeli government can do, and I'll tell you why the current Israeli government can't do it right now, because we don't have the political maneuverability to do it. I wish we would be declare that Israel will not build in those areas that someday will be part of a future Palestinian state, should that state ever be achieved. Or to say it conversely, Israel will only build in those areas which we are certain will be part of the Jewish state, should we ever reach a two-state solution. Until that time, we will be very proactive about creating what I called in a Wall Street Journal article last year a two-state situation in which the Palestinian populations of the West Bank enjoy the maximum amount of autonomy, maximum amount of freedom of movement, a maximum amount of economic prosperity, maximum amount of security, engage with Israel with a number of win-win projects. One particular project I like mentioning is the Rawabi project, which we finally managed to hook up to water, which we should have 40 Rawabis in the West Bank. That's a Palestinian neighborhood, for those who don't know, that's just very upscale, and it's an investment in stability, and it's a Palestinian interest, it's an Israeli interest. If we in the center could adopt a two-state situation formula, then we will take a lot of the wind out of the sails of a lot of these initiatives. We will have to not only just declare it, but we have to convince the world that we're serious about it. That's why we have to be proactive. And to do this, we need tailwind. I don't want to belabor the metaphor of the meteorological metaphor, but we need tailwind. We need tailwind for the Europeans. And one of my conversations with the Europeans is that the maximum that any Israeli government can give you, which is declaring we won't build outside the major blocks and Jewish Jerusalem, That falls far short of what the minimum of the Europeans are willing to accept. You have to help us in the Israeli center, because the Israeli center is beleaguered both from the right and from the left, extreme right and extreme left. What we need from a next American administration is the backing that if Israel takes this step, and it's a very difficult step politically in the state of Israel, very difficult. Just a parenthetically, I'm sure, Merav, in your party you do polls. In our party we do polls, and we found out that Israelis care overwhelmingly about security, and after security they care overwhelmingly about housing prices, and after that they care about income gaps, right? Middle class. The thing they care least about, 4%, is the peace process. So for me to make this cake to an Israeli constituency is very, very difficult. And the only way you can make it is not in terms of there's someday going to be peace, because nobody believes that. You have to make it in terms of security. This is going to enhance our security. It's going to protect us against BDS, because everyone understands BDS or think they do. And that this will enable us to ensure our future as a democratic and Jewish state. That's the only way we can do this. But we do this, you got to help us, you, all right, and the Washington Institute. You in Washington have to give the Israeli Center the backing that we will need to convince our own constituencies to make this effort. It is not easy, because these initiatives are very serious indeed. We take them very seriously, at least in Knesset. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Merav?
Thank you, David, and thank you to the Washington Institute. It is my first time here, that is true, and it's such a treat. And I'm very, very happy to be here. I hope the Washington food was good enough. I thought I'd start by saying that I agree with you, Michael. But
You
then,
could, it's okay. Nothing's going to happen.
but then you concluded with saying that people care so much about the housing and the cost of living and their personal insecurity that is origined exactly as it is in the States, is origined in social, economical reasons, in the fact that they cannot necessarily support themselves or their families by working very, very hard, and often, too often, the two parents in a family that work too hard and still are unable to support themselves, their families, let alone get a house or think of the even possibility of getting their children a house. And yet, you say the least thing that, the thing that interests them least is the peace process. And yet, you will argue that they vote not according to their social, economical situation, because if they were to vote on that, they would definitely not have voted to the people who have gotten them to this situation. But they vote on issues that relate to the peace
I
process.
don't see the security as relating to the peace
Isn't it my
process.
turn now?
They don't.
The Knesset here.
Yeah, really.
Now, talking in Israel about the peace process is like a wash for so many other issues. It's like the peace process and security, and that hides actually very deep psychological and social and cultural positions that have to do with the fear that is being generated by real threats that Israel has, which none of them is an existential threat, but still there are threats which I do not at all take lightly, but are being manipulated in order to generate fear, to defer the distress from the social, economic, real distresses of life to someone on the outside that is an enemy that we can vote on. It hides, and that is maybe the most important and major thing to understand about Israel and Israelis today, and about this government specifically. We are defined by the conflict. Think about it. Israel exists twice as long with the conflict in this structure than it existed before it. We do not recognize ourselves without the Palestinian conflict. Asking us to give this up is like asking us to give up, I don't know, a leg or something, or even something more prominent than that. it's really about redefining ourselves. Now, when we talk about whatever initiatives or possibilities for a peace process or for a solution, we need to ask ourselves, what do we want to achieve? Now, I think my guess would be that for this audience, it's obvious that we want to achieve the two-state solution. I know for a fact that big parts of my government do not want to achieve the two-state solution. Therefore, it would be weird to have a discussion over, is it a good initiative, a bad initiative, because it's up to what do we want to achieve. Now, I represent here a camp, a big camp in Israel, that believes that the Israeli interest is a viable, sustainable Palestinian state, because it would assure the sustainability of the state of the Jewish homeland, Israel. Because one of the most essential things that Israel lacks and needs desperately are borders. We are a state without borders, and that has physical ramifications as well as cultural and symbolic ramifications to it. We are a state without borders. So I would argue that not only is it the Palestinian state per se that we need, but what we must do is take responsibility to our own fate, to our, existence. We should take it into our own hands. So we should have every interest in the world to be those who initiate whatever process to achieve whatever outcome we want to achieve. By the way, that is even true, of course, for the parts of the government or the government that does not want to achieve the two-state solution. But I would think that as someone who is responsible for the safety and the well-being of the state of Israel, then they should come up with something else. Okay, you don't want this two-state solution. What do you want? But that is something we have never heard from our prime minister. There are parts of the government who want to annex part of the West Bank. There are parts, very remote, very marginal parts, who want a one state. By the way, Israeli people, not people from other countries. But from the prime minister, from the mainstream of the non-active people and political parts in Israel that do not do anything to achieve the two-state solution, we have not heard a different vision. So I will say once again, as someone who thinks that it is my interest and my responsibility to take every step for the Israeli interest, I do not want to invite pressure on Israel. I want to take the responsibility. And yes, by all means, I would want to have an Israeli initiative. I am only 3.5 years in politics. But prior to that, I had a career on the media and a career in feminism, which means I was involved in workers' rights and minority rights and women's rights and, of course, peace organizations, one of which was the Israeli Peace Initiative, which was all about creating a peace initiative that would reply to the Arab League Peace Initiative, which was presented to Israel 14 years ago and was not taken seriously not only by Israel, but also by other parts of the Western world. Now, in recent years, there's been some kind of acknowledging, noticing that there was such an initiative by the Arab League, which during this time, by the way, it has reaffirmed it every year ever since, even though the League itself has, of course, changed dramatically with everything that's happened. So, to conclude, I will say, unfortunately, my government is in a state in which it sees itself as the ultimate victim. It sees itself and Israel as the ultimate victim, and it fights for this monopoly, for the monopoly of this role of victimhood and self-victimization. given that, any initiative that comes from the outside is immediately being perceived and presented to Israeli public as pressure and as illegitimate pressure, which makes it impossible to work with it in a constructive way. So unfortunately, as I said, I do not want to invite pressure on Israel. I want Israel to be able to do what it needs to do and what is in its interest to do. B, I don't see how outside pressure is bringing anything good. It's just giving those who oppose working towards an actual good solution. It's giving them something to work with in order to waste time and by way to show once again how all the world's against us, which is the narrative of this government and has been for a long time already. But I will say that there is no doubt as to the need to work for a solution. Now, what you can do about that, okay, we can discuss this later. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I think what's interesting is, despite the party differences, I think we saw here among our panelists a convergence on the need of Israel to take an initiative. That if it doesn't like internationalization, come up with an alternative. Some would say, why don't you ask for the Palestinians to have a Palestinian initiative? Well, they're very comfortable with the internationalization because they feel it plays to their home court advantage. So they would be happy for that to continue. Both Michael and Merav and Oded, I think too, they expressed certain frustration that this hasn't happened. So I guess the logical question is to say, what would it take for Israel to do it? What would be its components? And what would you like the United States to do in this regard? I just think, and here's where the nexus point between politics and policy, and I realize that there are not too many people that care about every twist and turn in Israeli politics here in Washington, but I thought there was one hope, and that was in May when Prime Minister Netanyahu and the leader of the Labor Party / Zionist Union, Bougie Herzog, seemed to have a set of principles that would have changed things. You had an effort that would have said no building indeed beyond the barrier, which both our panelists basically alluded to, and would have kind of then made clear that there is an alternative. You had in this extraordinary moment while these talks were like in full, reaching the crescendo mode, that the president of Egypt got on TV and basically said, look, I'm willing to help out and have an Egyptian initiative if there's only unity among the Jews, which is amazing when you think about it. That the leader of the Arab state would, the leading Arab state would say that. So I wonder, was this moment missed? Michael refers to the Israeli Center. Dennis Ross and I did a piece wondering, is this the rupture of the Israeli Center, that the center doesn't hold in Israel? That here you had this moment, but it was killed by people on the right side of Netanyahu in the Likud, and maybe on the left side of Herzog in Labor. And together, they smashed it. Now, Bougie stood up and said, I still think it's the right approach. And the prime minister, feeling he didn't sense the support, backed away. He backed away. So, I don't know, I'd like to ask you, when you talk about that moment, is the moment that it's not that we didn't think the terms were good, but we didn't have confidence that the prime minister would implement those terms. Why didn't that moment work? That off-ramp, as we sometimes call it in Washington, and has the moment permanently now been missed? So I don't know who wants to start on that.
I will start because you have accused us, people.
I said left and right, just to be clear.
No. It doesn't matter. The reality is that it doesn't matter how much. It does matter, of course, but there was not enough opposition within labor to stop this move if the prime minister would have decided to go for it. The reality is that the person who refused to commit to the terms that would have made this opportunity that you are so hopefully, and I subscribe to this notion of hope, but it was not a real opportunity because the prime minister was not willing to commit to what it takes. This is why it didn't happen and nothing else. Now, how much is it up to Elkin or other right-wingers in his government that made him not go for it? I don't know, and I don't care. It does not matter. Bottom line, it's his decision, and he made it. He chose Lieberman over a unity government that could have gone for some kind of move.
Okay. Michael?
Listen, I wasn't involved in negotiations the way Merav was. I mean, the impression of the Israeli public was the person who bore most of the responsibility was Shelley. And Bougie, when he gave his speech,
Explain who she is, because they don't know her. She's not known here.
She's a very strong figure in the Labor Party. And when Bougie gave his speech saying why it fell through, he didn't blame the Prime Minister. He blamed members of his own party. So I'm just reading what I knew. And of course, the Israeli news always gets it accurate. So I'm just knowing what I read in the newspaper. So maybe they're all wrong, and maybe it was because Bibi refused to sign on something. I don't know. It's very important that we get on the same page. I do not believe there's a symmetry between us and the Palestinians, that we need the conflict the way they need the conflict. I mean, any research on Israeli identity will tell you that the conflict plays a very, very small role in the formulation of Israeli identity, but a very large role in Palestinian identity. They need the conflict. And the way that it plays very little role in the way we defined ourselves. The government's message is not all the world's against us. On the contrary, the Prime Minister has just visited 4 African countries. His position is that today Israel is less isolated than at any time in its 68 years of existence. And it's a very compelling argument, because when I was the age of many of you people in this room, we didn't have relations with China. We didn't have relations with the Soviet bloc. We didn't have relations with India. We are arguably far less isolated
Not only
than
us,
today.
by the way, yes?
You're that young? And, it's not, we don't feel believe it in that way. And the big problem, I understand this is not the Knesset, and I can't intercede the way I would and yell at you in Knesset, but we have the reason security is so high on our national list and peace is so low is because people see a trade-off. They don't see peace leading to security. They see peace processes leading to insecurity. And that's you can't gainsay that argument, because we withdrew from Lebanon to advance peace. We withdrew from Gaza to advance peace. And we got thousands and thousands of rockets. We don't need borders. We got one internationally recognized border, and that's the Lebanese border. And how's that working out for us? Not so well. So people aren't convinced that we need the borders either. We have to deal with an Israeli internal reality. And here, I mentioned this during our conference here, David, that if there was one sort of major omission, it was that we do not have a representative of the Israeli right, of the Jewish Home Party. It's a very powerful party, and it represents a large constituency. And it is saying not only are we not going to freeze outside the blocks, it's saying we want to annex large segments of the West Bank, most of Area C. And in the absence of a viable alternative from the Labor Party, irrespective of who is responsible, Merav, let's leave that aside. The Jewish Home Party, its power within the Israeli coalition makes the type of initiative that I think we all agree is necessary very, very difficult. And I, as a member of the coalition, have debated against senior members of the Jewish Home Party, saying this is what we have to do, and they'll tell me openly that if we were to adopt that policy, they would leave the government, which presents the Prime Minister with a very difficult decision. Either do nothing and take the blow of the French initiative or a possible Obama initiative, or fall as Prime Minister, or commit political suicide, which historically, not just Israeli prime ministers, but I think most politicians are loath to do. So,
Michael, what do you say, though, to the answer of Merav, or someone would say, good, if they left, that's exactly what you want, because then the Zionist Union, with their 24 seats, is willing to step right in after losing, what are they, 8 or something like that?
Bibi has the Y scar, Dennis. Dennis, you there?
Yeah.
He's got the Y scar. You want to tell him what the Y scar is?
Yeah, the Y scar is the belief that 1998, that if he lost part of the right, Labor would join and give him a safety net, and he fell in May 1999 because the Labor came together with the ultra-Orthodox.
Wise car.
And
Yeah.
Ehud Barak was
Yeah.
elected,
Yeah.
and the rest is history,
All right,
and
Oded.
not in the best possible way.
I'm arguing with myself now.
That's the best argument, yeah.
No, it's not. It's just because my wife is not here, so I. And I will say that I'm speaking about, or you were asking about an initiative that was or wasn't. It's not clear to me, and I would say that none of our agreements with any of our neighbors, Jordanians, Egyptians, Palestinians, came as a result of someone else's initiative. It was an initial decision by the leadership on the two sides, which led to negotiations, sometimes without even a clue given to the American administration at the time. And that led to eventually it led to agreements. And nothing will change that, in my view, and therefore you need an initial will on the leadership. I'm arguing because I'm speaking about simultaneously about a UN Security Council resolution. I'm not suggesting that I'm inviting pressure, and I'm not suggesting that this is a substitute to direct negotiations. These will be just benchmarks, and you still have to fill all the blanks. When you speak about Jerusalem, it's not sufficient to say that the solution will include certain ingredients. You still have to negotiate the meat and the flesh and the bones of this issue, as well as other issues. Now, I think, and I sort of argued on this with Merav before we walked in, ever since 1977, the Israeli society went center-right. Well, there were two flukes. One was Rabin in 92, and another one in 99, Barak. And the Israeli society veered to the center-left. This is the current picture, and I'm not so sure it's not the future, at least the foreseeable future picture. Now, the initiative that Michael was speaking, the problem with that is, and I look at it I'm trying to look at it from Netanyahu's point of view, the reluctance. Number one, and it was mentioned, it comes to, or could come to, about political suicide. And why would he do it? He may do it if there is a threat of a Security Council resolution, no matter who is the sponsor or co-sponsor of such a resolution. The major problem, I think, is what is exactly the return? What is the quid pro quo that he gets if he does that? Assuming the coalition doesn't break or doesn't fall, and Bennett, for whatever reason, remains in the government. And this is, I think, a major problem. Now, you can correct it if you have a draft. You can try to correct it if you have the U.S. deciding to go to the Security Council. And in the dialogue, you can introduce some sort of a return for that. For example, the recognition of the the legitimacy of the security concern. You can get even something which I personally support, a recognition of Israel being the homeland of the Jewish people, which the Palestinians and the rest of the Arab world refuse to recognize. I'm not so sure that the EU has recognized it. The US did. in the various statements by the president and others. And so there is at least some sort of a return on the, or a flip side to concessions that Israel is required to make in the context of such a resolution in the Security Council. But if it's an Israeli individual, one-side initiative, or call it whatever, what do you get? How do you go to the Knesset? You explain to me. You go to, a prime minister goes to the Knesset. He says, I have decided to launch an Israeli initiative by which, for example, Israel will freeze settlements in certain areas. And if I am Bennett, I'm asking, wonderful, Mr. Prime Minister, what did you get for that? What is the return by the Palestinians for the gesture? Bennett, I am opposed to it, but what exactly? Explain to me.
The answer?
Yeah.
We did it in 2009. We had a 10-month moratorium. And
what
he
did you
just
get?
And what we get was we did it for the President of the United States. We did it to preserve our relationship with the Obama
And what did
administration.
you get?
We got not very much. And it's a very it's a difficult argument to make today, but the argument we have to make, and I'm not saying it's an easy argument, is to say that if we don't do this, we will expose ourselves to boycotts, sanctions, ultimately, that would pose a strategic danger to the state of Israel. It's not an easy sell to the Israeli public. That's my point.
Michael,
I have to tell you that I am listening to you, Oded. If Michael were to say the things that you're saying, I would have said, okay, this is my right-wing coalition. But
hearing
you saying that...
Go ahead.
Merav,
No, wait, let me
explain
explain.
to me, what do you get? You are the prime
What am
minister. How do you get the votes in the Knesset for that?
No, I want to ask you the question isn't that. The question is, what do you get from building in the settlements? This is the question that should be on the table.
Yes.
What do you as Israel gain from building in the settlements? All you get is worsening the situation all the more, all the time. It's going to be more painful, more expensive, more difficult to ever to get to the solution, which we will have to get to eventually this way or another.
I fully agree with you.
So the question is not what do you get from freezing the building in the settlements. And of course, what Michael said is extremely relevant. Israel has a huge problem of image that it needs to deal with today in the world. The reason that why it's so easy to hang on Israel all kinds of other injustices is because of what it looks like it's doing, even sometimes, by the way, more than what it's really doing. It's a world of black and white, of immediate satisfaction, of very little reality, but a lot of imagined and created reality with which Israel needs to be able to deal with. Okay. Now, just one last sentence.
I understand why I didn't go to the Knesset, because you didn't give me the opportunity to finish.
That's why we get the big check.
Michael didn't let you finish before that.
1 minute, just before.
No, I just want to say that just one last
This is the Knesset. It's become the Knesset. Wait 1 second. Let me just, I want to give you each one more round. Then I'm going to ask my colleague.
Let me just.
One moment. Okay, 1 moment. And then I want you could respond to that, but I want you to respond to when Prime Minister went to Herzl's grave in the summer of 2013, before the Kerry initiative, and he said, the status quo is bad for Israel. If we want to be a Jewish state, it's bad for us to be a binational state if we do nothing. This is the Prime Minister of Israel, not the head of the Labor Party. So Michael, maybe you, since you're in his coalition, you could explain to us that all the security arguments I get, the Middle East is in a volcano, there's all these eruptions everywhere, Israel equates withdrawal with vulnerability, military withdrawal, I get all that. My question is, though, how does the Prime Minister square what he said at Herzl's grave with the current situation, the impasse? In other words, doing nothing, it's not what do I get from it, but if I don't do something, how do you avoid Israel becoming a binational state when the raison d'etre of Israel, and not just of the Likud, but all Israelis, most Jewish Israelis, I would say, is that it remain a Jewish state? So just explain to me, as Netanyahu watchers, maybe Merav, you could say, is in the opposition, but I'll start with you, Michael. How does the prime minister, if he has no plan B, let's say plan A is negotiations, and that's only on the grand deal because the Palestinians won't do anything less than a grand deal, but doing at least the minimum he needs to maintain the objective he so richly, says he wants, which is a Jewish state. How does the status quo and that objective work together?
Thank you for that easy question. So I'm not ambassador anymore, and I don't have to be his spokesperson. I represent myself, and I represent my party. I'm in the coalition broadly, and I know what I would think and what I recommend to the members of my party as part of the coalition, and that is that the status quo does not work in Israel's favor. I just think there's a debate about whether it's sustainable or not, or how sustainable, and I think it's a valid debate, and whether the alternative to not sustaining the status quo is worse than sustaining it. That's a valid debate, too. I don't know how many of you are Nathan Englander fans and read the book, What Are We Talking About When We Talk About Anne Frank? All right, what do we talk about? We talk about a Palestinian state. We're talking about a state that has no really viable national institutions, that has an unelected, corrupt leadership, that is surrounded by instability and on all its borders, a state whose leadership will not survive more than 3 days unless the Israeli IDF and other security services are there. Really, that's what we're talking about, a Palestinian state. So let's be honest about it. We're talking about a state that at best is going to fall 3 days to Hamas and worse 3 days to ISIS. So, and by the way, this is the Israelis understand this. They're not stupid. I believe that we should have the two-state solution as our position, and that we have to prove to the world that we're serious about it. That we're serious about it. We have it our position. It doesn't mean it's going to have it happen tomorrow. We got to be responsible. So the prime minister has to walk some very delicate lines. So on one hand, he's going to say, in whatever statement he's going to say, the status quo is not unattainable. There's going to be a terrorist attacks, as there were last week, and he's going to order the building of 42 houses in Kiryat Arba, because he's got to satisfy that coalition. I want to talk about my visit to Kiryat Arba if we have a chance right after that, because I went the day after the attack. But behind the scenes, he's going to be working with our new best friends in the Gulf, and trying to form some regional framework. He may be talking to the Russians about supporting that type of regional framework that would serve as an alternative or a counterweight to the French initiative. There are ways that Israel can be proactive. I would like to see Israel be more publicly proactive, and as I said earlier, to take some of the wind out of the sails of the international initiatives and of the delegitimization campaign. That's the best answer I can give you. I'm not involved in his diplomacy right now.
Okay. All right. Dennis Ross.
No.
I want to pose the question to you, because you're saying he can't do it in effect if he does an initiative because he's getting nothing in return. He shouldn't look like a friar, right? He shouldn't look like a sucker. Well, both Michael and Merav are giving you, in a sense, an answer of sorts, but I would even pose it differently to you and ask for your response.
No longer a Norse god. Go ahead.
I'm going to pose. Let me explain what I mean. I was so fixated on Oded that I almost decided not to ask the rest of the question. But now that you're Oded again, I can ask the question. It seems to me, Oded, that when you take an initiative, you don't just take an initiative, you prepare the ground for it. And you may have low expectations about what you get from the Palestinians, but maybe what you're doing is you come to us privately and you say, here are the kind of things we're trying to do. Now here's what we would need for you when we do it. And what we need from you in response is also, what are you prepared to do with the Europeans? And what will you do with the Arabs? And how can we frame this in a way so that what Israel is getting is something maybe from the international community? Maybe one of the things is that we begin to make some demands on the Palestinians as well. How about when Israel takes a step that demonstrates it's actually doing something tangible, committed to two states, something should be expected of the Palestinians that they demonstrate they're committed to two states. For example, how about stopping the anti-normalization movement? How about stopping putting pressure and intimidation on any Palestinian who wants to deal with an Israeli? How about stop financing those who try to kill Israelis and get killed, and financing their families and calling them martyrs? things that would demonstrate actually that Palestinians are actually committed to two states as well. So there are things Israel could get, but you can't get them if you don't actually have an initiative to work with.
Oded, go ahead.
In the 2 days that we had here in the Washington Institute discussing these issues and others in terms of the bilateral relations between the United States, I said, and I repeat here for the benefit of the audience, the gap between what the international community, quote unquote, expects and what Israel can give is wide, very wide. I read, not because of that, but I read the French initiative or the draft that they submitted, and it gives you a clue about the differences between what Israel expects and what the international community, at least as far as the EU is concerned, goes for. Now, in order, in my view, that what you expect Israeli initiative to achieve, or what Michael and Merav are waiting for, is some sort of staying away from the international, from the Security Council. All the benefits, and I don't want to underestimate them, that you mentioned in terms of what can some of our neighbors, including the Palestinians, do if we come out with an initiative. So, there will have to be a serious, significant concession on the territorial one. By the way, I'm for it. I'm just looking skeptically at what we will get, what from the eyes of the, or by the eyes of the, in the eyes of the Prime Minister, where does it leave him? So we will have to give a significant, make a significant concession on the territorial. For example, allowing the Palestinians to act, at least economically speaking, in Area C. This is a major concession because it involves changing the status of this area. This is 60% of the West Bank. It involves in allowing the Gaza to develop a port. It may need, if you want to get the international community to accept it, some sort of concession in Jerusalem, in the remote suburbs of Jerusalem. And it will certainly, when you read all the statements of the US and the European Union and the Chinese and the Russians, the criticism, the major criticism against Israel currently is on settlement. So it will mean freezing buildings in the settlements, at least in the area beyond the defense line, if not more than that. It will mean even Jerusalem, suburbs being, stop all the plans that you're coming out every Monday and Thursday. So that certainly confronts him with the coalition members, some of them. It certainly, or I would put a doubt on the international community ability to deliver the parts which do not belong to what they are doing, the international community, but certainly I put a question mark on the Palestinian ability to deliver. Abbas is hardly the mayor of Ramallah. Certainly is not the mayor of Gaza. And we know that. We don't know how long, what is not life expectancy, but is political life expectancy.
It may be longer than his actual life expectancy.
Okay.
These are question marks, and I repeat, I'm all for the initiative. I just think that in order to be at least have a chance to succeed, it has to be so meaningful, so substantive, that it puts Netanyahu in a serious political situation domestically.
Merav, you wanted to come in?
Yes, please. First of all, I want to start from answering your question about the status quo. You know, my late grandfather used to say, "Oter gesucht." Those of you who speak, he speak Yiddish, it means so he said. So he said. He said many things. The question is, what does he do? Now, I have to tell you, I never heard this saying of Netanyahu that the status quo is not good, but I see what he's been doing, and everything that he's doing is aimed at maintaining what he considers to be a status quo, whereas, of course, there never is a status quo because reality changes, and very rapidly in the Middle East recently. So, and I see him when he comes to the committee. It's, as you said, and we all know, he does not have an alternative vision, but the mere idea of Palestinian state is horrific for him. He sees this as the ultimate nightmare. And Michael just, described part of the nightmare, how non-functional this Palestinian state would be. I will debate that, unfortunately, Israel has part of the responsibility to the fact that this Palestinian Authority has become so non-functional because it has really made sure that it is unable to function over and over again. And I will say that there are so many steps on the ground that Israeli government can take even today without risking anything with its coalition. Things that have to do with even preventing a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which, if, God forbid, happens, we will be the first one to be blamed of it. And still we do nothing to prevent it. It's giving money, it's giving the possibility to build, not in the C areas, in the B areas. Let them build, let them, the crisis, the overwhelming, unbelievable crisis over allowing Rawabi, the new Palestinian city, to have water. How many months did that take? Did that help Abbas to be effective in his rule of the Palestinians? So it's not about what Netanyahu says, it's about what he does. He also said two-state solution a couple of times. So what? Now, two more points that I want to make. One is that it's not freezing building in the settlements is by no way a hard sell to Israeli public. Israeli public, by large, does not care about building in the settlements at all. He only cares about it when it's being presented to it as like Dennis said rightfully, that we come out suckers, that we are only giving and not getting anything in return. This is the only time they will care about anything, by the way. It's very, very strongly embedded, but not only in Israeli culture. I think if you look at the American response and definitely the backlash now to the policy of President Obama, the foreign policy of President Obama, then you will see that it's not an Israeli phenomenon. So freezing the building in the settlements is really not a hard sell to Israeli public. And the number one thing that we will gain from it, Oded, is that once Israel will do the thing that it never does and will take responsibility for what it's actually responsible for, we will not continue to be blamed for the things that we are not responsible for. Once Israel takes responsibility, you will see that all of a sudden, all the rest of the world will start turning to the Palestinians to do their part. If not for anything else, this is definitely a very good reason why we should do the things that we can do.
Okay, right here. Go ahead. Mike, that's coming.
If I could make a comment and invite a response. The discussion has been very interesting, but I think it's also very disturbing because I think you're tackling a very serious issue, and there's a lot of confusion about what it is that you're advocating, if I may say so. You're talking about an Israeli initiative. And what I heard the panelists say is that the primary reason for an Israeli initiative is to gain a public relations ground. BDS movement, et cetera, is undercutting Israel. Israel has to be seen as doing something.
Also preserving
But-
Israel as an Israeli as a democratic and Jewish state.
Right.
Just no
but-
small things.
No, creating the
things.
impression,
All right.
in your words, I heard you say that before, creating the impression that Israel is doing something positive. My point is this, and here's where I think there's confusion. There are two separate spheres, and they have to be kept distinct. One sphere is the multilateral sphere. That's where you're going. That's where you have France, which is actually reinvigorating initiatives that it had when I was at the UN for 6 years, and that we vetoed repeatedly, like the Franco-Egyptian initiatives, because the U.S. position was, and I believe still remains, that the only path to a Arab-Israeli or Palestinian-Israeli solution is through direct negotiations, and that all multilateral efforts are, quote, this is the big word, a distraction. Now, that doesn't obviate from your opportunity to have the leadership of Israel make all kinds of suggestions and initiatives. But if you do so in the multilateral plane, you face the danger of really undercutting the U.S. government position, which you're going to want, because you're going to want to maintain that the U.S. government position has been and should continue to be, to stress the point that anything outside of direct negotiations constitutes a distraction. So I think you're confusing the multilateral and the direct. And if you try to have the Israeli ambassador at the UN introduce an initiative, I think that would be very counterproductive. I invite your comments.
So I disagree. It's not about, this isn't multi-tiered chess. I mentioned parenthetically when you were talking that it's also about preserving Israel as a democratic and Jewish state, which are no small goals as far as we're concerned. And I think Merav would agree with me on that. On the international sphere, it's about protecting ourselves. Our position will remain direct negotiations. We'll always be at the table, even if the chair is empty. That's going to be our position. Until that time, we are going to take steps that are going to protect us, our identity, our democracy, and protect us against possible BDS delegitimization moves by the Palestinians. Because remember, I stressed in my remarks the nexus between the two. And there are other nexusi here also, how Hezbollah and Hamas fit into this equation too. They also have a military tactic that serves a diplomatic and legal strategy. It all ends up at the same place of delegitimization. How do we protect ourselves? We need a diplomatic Iron Dome. That's all we're talking about. We're not talking about, winning the battle here. We're talking about protecting our not our skies, but our markets and our students from delegitimization. That's what it
Hey, I'm going to call Saeed Arakat from the Al-Quds newspaper.
Thank you, David. My name is Saeed Arakat. I'm a Palestinian journalist, and I can assure you the Palestinians do not need the conflict. They need to end the conflict that has decimated them for a very long time. My question is to Michaeli. You suggested that Israel is a country without borders. Do you have, as a coalition, do you have a plan or a border plan that you can present, and does it follow the line that Mr. Eran spoke about, which is along the wall? By the way, I'm from Oded, where the wall goes 26 feet high. It's not just a little tiny fence. Thank you.
Thank you. I am not from the coalition. I am from the opposition now. So, and I'll tell you why I will not lay out a plan, not mine and not any other, for borders. Because I think this is not the way to go, but it's not the way to go about it. First of all, in Israel today, there is a problem that we have become completely addicted to negotiating among ourselves. So whenever you come up with some kind of peace initiative within Israel, then automatically people will start argue over what are we giving or not giving, what are we willing to or not willing to, which is completely futile because it's within ourselves. And so I see no point in that. And I have to tell you what the way and listening to my colleagues here, the number one thing I'm maybe worried about is that the whole discussion is a discussion of a zero-sum game, where I think this is the binary change that we need to make. It should not be a zero-sum game. It's not that whatever we give, and they get, and you get, then we lose, and vice versa. I think there's a common good issue here. I think it's in both our interests, both as Israelis. I mean, first and foremost, of course, as an Israeli, I am committed to the Israeli interest. But it's also, of course, in the Palestinian interest, and I agree with what you just said, that it's also in the Palestinian interest to end the conflict and to find some kind of solution. And to do that, we need to be able to sit down with the political will to find a solution. This is the core launching point that is missing. Because if there's a will, there's a way. And what will be the specific way that will bring us to the bottom line eventually? It depends on who's sitting on the other side of, the both sides of the table at a specific time, what is more important at that time, and what is more possible at that point in time when we reach this moment where there is political will, genuine political will to actually find a solution. And then we will also find the line of borders, which will be best for both of us.
I need to
Unfortunately,
disagree
we are
fundamentally.
not
Reframing.
there yet.
Can I disagree
Go
very
ahead.
fundamentally, very
Go ahead.
quickly? In the Middle East, if there is a will, it does not mean there's a way. And among other things, I deal with my committee in Knesset is looking at the situation in Gaza, where 90% of the water has been rendered undrinkable by the Palestinians digging illegal wells, where there's 40% unemployment, there's no birth control, so the population is out of control. There's very little Israel can do to relieve the situation in Gaza. Syria is falling apart. There's very little that Israel could do with all the will in the world to save Syria. We can't put it back together again. Iraq, the same thing. There's very little we can do to give the Palestinians, I believe, a leadership and the type of social cohesion and institutions they would need to sustain a nation state. There's just a limit to what we do. In the base of your argument, Merav, and I pain me to say this, is a type of racism of the left, where we deny the other side any agency. It's all about us and what we do. They don't do anything, all right? They don't incite. They don't break. They don't, throw out a good prime minister like Salam Fayyad, all right? They don't do any of these things. It's all about us. And somehow, if we had the will, if Bibi Netanyahu would go up there and say, "I'm going to make a two-state solution," damn, there's going to be a two-state solution within the next week.
Okay, so
And
now I'm racist.
it's so emphatically
That's-
untrue,
yeah.
and so, in a way, so indulgent.
Yeah.
It's just it's not just about us. It's also about them, and I don't think you're doing them a favor by denying them agency.
Okay, so
All right?
there
Treat them
is-
like adults. Let's start with that one.
Okay, I wanna make two to make you notice, if you will, two things. First of all, this is the new coalition party line, and that's to say that actually the left is the one that's racist. This has been going on
saying
for
for years.
the last few.
Mike says he's consistent on that.
For years. You
And
should
the
hear me on
second
this.
is that for Israeli eyes, such as Oren, taking responsibility means taking the blame and taking the fault. And there is
You're on the
no
same course as
distinction. And there is no distinction. It's not the same words in Hebrew. But in Israel, and definitely on the right in Israel, there is no ability to distinct between the two. Not only am I not saying that it's not up to them, but what I'm saying is that I am not responsible for them. They are responsible for them. You keep saying it's them, it's them, it's them, it's them, it's everybody else's, it's everyone else's, only not us. What I am saying is I want to take responsibility for my part, and then it'll be up to them to do their part. This is what I'm saying.
All right.
enough.
All right. Paul Sham of the University of Maryland.
Fair enough.
Thanks. At an earlier point in the discussion, I think both Quartet Knesset talked about a coalition or an initiative of the center, that was the only way to make things work. You seem to have left that somewhat, but I wonder if you can imagine how that could come about. there's no leadership on the left, perhaps present company accepted. And on the right, I don't see Bibi being willing to forsake the far right. So what is left other than an international initiative, which Ambassador Eran talked about at the beginning? How can you imagine a centrist coalition really becoming coherent enough to do anything?
All right, before you respond,
Oded agrees
one second.
with you.
Merav, before we respond, because we're getting close towards the end, I'm going to take a whole spate of questions and then have you guys make concluding remarks and answer what you can. Maury Amatai put up his hand, and then we'll get to you. First, Maury. Here's the mic.
Given the history and the actions of the Palestinian leadership since Oslo, what realistically could be expected of the actions or viability of a future Palestinian state, assuming Gaza is included?
Okay, and right over here.
Yeah, I'll start out with a statement. You know, you don't really make peace with your enemies. You make peace with your former enemies. And I hear nothing about the fact that there have been 5 previous attempts at a 2-state solution. The last one was almost 2008, I believe. We hear nothing about the intense incitement to violence in the Palestinian territories, in the schools, the mosques, newspapers, etc.
I think I said something.
This is a serious problem. If we expect Israel to concede something or another, where is the concession from the Palestinians? And perhaps the last one, and nothing's been said about this, regarding the question, is there an ideology, the Islamic ideology, which sort of overhangs in terms of, say, Jerusalem itself, which is the most holy site to both Christianity and to Judaism, and is that entering into it? And I think I'd like to hear some comments along those 3 lines.
All right, let's, what?
These young people over here.
Yeah, okay, there's one right over there, right over there.
He's not young.
You're very kind to the left.
Yeah.
Kind of let himself think.
Depends which way you look at it. Rafi Danziger.
Rafi Danziger,
You're young,
advisor
Dan.
to
Rafi,
AIPAC.
you're always young in my eyes. Go on.
Actually, since there's so much pessimism about the possibility of actually getting a peace agreement, what about David's idea of coordinated unilateralism?
Okay. And we'll see the one more. All right. Yeah, right back here. Oh, no, right here. Next to Maury. He's had his hand up for a while.
Right.
Since there's no one to the right of you on the panel, Ambassador Oren, not that way. And just, do you really claim, I mean, I've always respected your analysis. So the question is.
Up till now.
Up till now.
Right.
Are you really claiming that Israel will get credit from the Europeans and the present administration if they took these kinds of actions that
That
you've
was
proposed?
precisely my point in my remarks. We're not getting credit.
But will
But
we
we-
get
but we
credit
have to.
if we do?
Now
Do you really
our goal
believe?
should be to try to get credit.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can get it out of this administration. And
All right,
with
Mike,
Europeans
one
as
second.
well.
Let's let Rob Sadloff have the final question.
Not a peace process question.
No.
Hey, Rob, hi.
But since we have 2 members of parliament who come from parties for whom social and economic issues are the major issues of their campaign platforms, and want to represent a different theme, why is it that Israelis don't vote on these issues? Why is this the Israel exception in the entire Western world? And what can you do?
Simple answer.
What can you do to change that? If indeed you think Israelis should vote on these issues, your party, that's their central theme, and this is at least a major theme of your party, Merav.
Okay, so you got a lot of questions, guys, and we'll
I
start.
just want to point out that only men asked questions.
I asked
Well, whoever asked, we respond.
I don't know if
whoever
any
responded.
women were
Not even
trying
middle-aged
to-
men ask questions. That's the. Really, we wanted to get some.
Okay.
people over here. You guys didn't ask questions.
All right, Oded, why don't you start us off?
I want to emphasize one important, or the most important issue. All of us on this panel, I think, believe that the solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is necessary not because of the international pressure, not because the Palestinians deserve or don't deserve, but because to preserve the Jewish and democratic nature of Israel is calling for a separation one way or the other of the Israelis and the Palestinians. And of course, there are, if in the absence of an agreement, it has to be done in preserving at the same time the security requirements of Israel. I'm not calling for a unilateral Israeli withdrawal, far from that. I'm just underlying what is the key issue today. And this issue becomes very difficult to maintain, the Jewishness and the democracy of the State of Israel, because the number of settlers living in the West Bank is growing. Now, it becomes very difficult. It will be even impossible in the near future to separate the two sides. Now, I think this is an important issue to remember, and sometimes we do forget this issue. Number two. Yes, most probably the state of Palestine, whenever it becomes a state, will probably be failed state. But I draw your attention to the membership in the UN, and I'm asking you how many states you think are not failed and how many are failed states. Now, it is important to remember that this particular state, the failed state of Palestine, will be about 5 kilometers from where my grandsons are living. And this is...
States aren't threatening us. This one might.
Yeah.
That's the answer.
Oh, no, it is the answer.
Yeah.
But you cannot, because of that, continue the status quo, and there is no status quo. Things are changing by the day. So the question is, if you know in advance that this is going to be a failed state, you can devise plans and programs and monitoring and whatever necessary in order to reduce the possibility or the probability that this will be a failed state. And Palestinians are capable. They need to get their act together, absolutely, politically, economically, otherwise. And we can help. We can certainly help. And if and when they become a state and we reach agreements on many issues, including the economic relationship, we can certainly be very important in preventing the situation. I'll give you a simple example. We are about to finalize an agreement by which we will get 20,000 Chinese workers. Now, I grant you that 20,000 Chinese workers will be more efficient than 20,000 Palestinian workers. But I'm submitting to you, Maury, that it's our responsibility, if we have a choice, to bring the Palestinian workers. And even today, after 49 years of conflict, we will celebrate next year 50 years of being in the West Bank. Even to this very day, the numbers of terror activities committed by permitted Palestinian workers is less than 10 in these 50 years. I'm not so sure that it reaches 5. And so we can help in this respect. Now, in terms of the Palestinians' concessions that you asked, the nature of the conflict and the solution is that when and if it happens, we will give tangibles, territory. What the Palestinians can give is not much. It is the recognition of Israel and the recognition of Israel as a Jewish homeland. And this is the nature. So when you ask them to make, in the negotiations, another Arikat used to say to me, Oded, you won the war. You have 77% of the West Bank, of the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. What else do you want? Now there's a long list of what I want. But this is the nature of the conflict and the solution, and we have to realize that they can give, but not much.
Okay, succinct answers, because I don't want to keep people over time, but Michael, then Merav.
Okay, I'm going to start off with an answer to Rob's question, because strangely enough, Rob, yours was the easiest question. Why is it when we have 20% of the population under the poverty level, what are the worst housing crises going? By every parameters, we face very serious social and economic problems. Why do people not vote for that? And the evidence I'll adduce is my son, Yoav, who some of you know, who lives in northern Tel Aviv. And he can't afford to buy the apartment in which he lives. And the apartment that he's renting went up about 1 million shekels over the course of the last year that he's been living there. And he complains endlessly about it until there are 2 major terrorist attacks in North Tel Aviv. At which point he calls me up and said, Abba, we've got to kill them. All right? We've got to adopt the strongest security policies because my kids are endangered. That's it. That's your answer. If your kids were endangered, you'd vote for security policies too before the cost of your house. It's that simple. It's about life. It's about survival. My answer is going to take issue with all the vocabulary here. There's been a lot of vocabulary about separation, about concessions, about solutions, about coordinated unilateralism. I don't ascribe to any of this vocabulary. I have a completely different lexicon. Lexicon is about managing the conflict. I don't think there's actually a solution lingering out there that at least maybe in my lifetime anymore. There's a solution for the Middle East, a solution for Syria, a solution for Iraq, and many of the same problems that plague those areas plague our areas. It's about social cohesion. It's about culture. It's about many issues over which we can impact with all the will. I don't necessarily believe in separation. I think much of our ability to manage a better conflict will be through cooperation with the Palestinians and not separating from them. We all mentioned Rawabi. That's an act of cooperation, not of separation. Coordinated unilateralism, if you have somebody to coordinate with. I don't know if we do have anybody to coordinate. If we do, as they say in ancient Hebrew, achla. It's great. Let's coordinate. If we don't, we should still be thinking about unilateral moves that will ensure our future as a Jewish and democratic state and help us defray. I want to stress this. Help us defray some of the international pressure against us. It is not a concession. I'm engaged in deep discussions with our European friends, and there's a huge gap, as I mentioned before, between the maximum that any Israeli government can give and the minimum they're willing to actually openly embrace, as there was during this administration. Maybe there'll be a different administration. Maybe that administration will be convinced that if we do freeze beyond the blocks, then they will go to bat again for us, for the Europeans. Maybe. We should still do it. It's about taking our destiny in our own hands. I would love to believe the Saudis are going to sit with us tomorrow. I'm very skeptical. I think in the Middle East, they'll support us behind the scenes, but they're not going to sit around a table with us and force an agreement onto the Palestinians, as some people in the Israeli political system seem to think, not us. But I think it's about assuming responsibility for our destiny. And I'm going to end on a strange note. I'm actually going to agree with Merav. I think that selling this policy to the Israeli public, while not easy, especially during a period of terror, because nobody wants to be perceived as a friar and given in, may not be ultimately that difficult. I went to I made 2 condolence calls, 2 Shiva calls, just before getting on the plane. One was to Kiryat Arba and the other was to Othniel. And in Kiryat Arba, a 13-year-old girl, Halal Ariel, was stabbed in her bed. But in Otniel, Rabbi Mickey Marks, one of the heads of the Otniel Yeshiva, was killed in front of his family. And you think, okay, they're both settlers. They live within, 10-minute drive from one another, but very different settlements. The people in Kiryat Arba, where they talked about, how this is our land, there's no place for the Arabs here, and it's all about a fight to the death. The Marx family, the people in Otniel, were very different. We want to live in brotherhood with our Palestinian neighbors. Yes, we're settlers. Yes, we believe that this is our land, but we understand they also think it's their land, and we want to reach a peaceful agreement. So even among the settlers, and you know this, there's a wide variance of opinions. And there are people you could make this case to. But you'd have to make the case on not that this is going to bring peace, not that this is going to bring a solution, okay? Not that this is even a concession. You got to change your vocabulary. You got to say that this helps ensure us. This is an Israeli interest. Jewish, democratic, protects us against bad things that some of our sometimes allies in the world want to do against us, particularly in Western Europe. That's your argument, period.
Very good. Merav, last words.
I was 7 years old in the Yom Kippur 73 war. And I was living in Petah Tikva, the center of Israel, and we were sitting in shelters because there was an option of bombing of foreign airplanes in the center of Israel. And there was no fear. There was no anxiety. Nobody spoke of an existential threat, even though back then we were much more under existential threat than Israel is today. You probably weren't here when I spoke in the beginning, because I said we are defined by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That is why people vote on that. Because unfortunately, Netanyahu is extremely successful in deflecting and deferring their economical, social, existential insecurity, which is understood and just, and deferring it to outside threats, which are, even though not existential, are real. Think about it. Don't take me on the exact number, but about 1/10 of the number of people dying from terror in Israel is about 1/10 from the number of those who die in car accidents. It's far from existential threat, but it is what defines us, and this is what people vote on. And when Netanyahu says Netanyahu is good for the Jews in '96, and then in 2016 he says the right-wing government is in danger, and the Arabs are coming in droves, brought by in buses paid for by the leftist NGOs, that is exactly what he's maintaining. And this is why people do not vote according to their real issues of mere life, like Netanyahu says it. Now, I disagree with you. My party does not stand for only social, economical, and not even primarily for those issues. There are 3 major spheres that I see as defining life in general and in Israel specifically. It's the political security sphere, in which we believe in a political agreement and solution where the other side does not believe in it. There's the social economical sphere, in which we believe in some kind of welfare state, and a state that is fulfilling its obligation to give its citizens the social services they deserve. And there's the sphere of the democracy and state and religion, on which we believe in freedom of religion, in freedom of religion, from religion. We believe in a the homeland of the Jewish states that accepts really all kinds of Jews, all kinds of Judaisms, and we believe in democracy as something that defines Judaism, by the way, not something that stands opposite to Judaism, but part of it is something that is embedded in Judaism and the other way around. That is what we stand for, and that was what we're fighting for. It's very difficult to stand for these issues because too often it's being portrayed as non-loyal to what Netanyahu is defining as Jewish. I want to say just a final note, like you say. I think that I'll tell you what will make the difference, that there will be a way when there will be a will, okay? And that is that we have, as you said, and I take this, we have to change the vocabulary. And as I said, we must stop seeing this as a zero-sum game. It will take things like transitional justice to work between us and the Palestinians in order to create something that is sustainable and secure and prosperous and good for both of us, because it's in both of us, of our interests. And the things that those settlers said to you are true. And this is the beginning of the recognition in the two different narratives and the essential need on both sides to recognize the two different narratives, not necessarily to accept them. I don't have to take responsibility for what they consider to be the Nakba. Definitely not. But I need to recognize that this is their narrative.
Sure, definitely.
And they have to recognize the fact that we too are a state of refugees. Not so long ago is when we became a state of refugees. So this is what we have to work with. And this is what will make it eventually work. And I have no doubt, by the way, in my mind, that eventually it will work.
On that happy note, I'd ask you to applaud and thank our panelists for a fascinating discussion. Thank you all. Please come again.